Hold on for an incredible tale of bravery. A boy of only 9 years defies a fierce storm to save the life of an elderly man. What happens next will truly surprise you. Are you ready for this journey of heroism? If you haven't subscribed yet, hit that subscribe button now and don't miss any of these amazing stories. In the small town of Willow Creek, nestled in a landscape that seemed to have been carved by nature itself, the residents lived a simple life, keeping pace with the rhythms of the earth and sky. The village lay peacefully between hills draped in a green mantle and a dense forest, where ancient trees formed a natural barrier around the wooden and stone houses. The inhabitants, accustomed to this blend of tranquility and mystery, were well aware that the weather in Willow Creek was peculiar. At times, the sky would open up into a deep, bright blue, illuminating every corner with a warm glow. Other times, thick clouds would appear out of nowhere, bringing with them an unexpected storm or a dense fog that wrapped everything in a shroud, as if trying to hide the town from the rest of the world. It was a place where nature seemed to dictate the rules, and the residents had learned to coexist with this almost mystical unpredictability. The town had an atmosphere that felt as though it guarded ancient secrets. At night, the wind whistled through the tall branches, as if whispering stories from times long past, stirring the imagination of those brave enough to listen. During winter, when the trees shed their leaves, shadows stretched long, dancing on the walls of houses, and making the streets appear as silent, mysterious labyrinths. In spring, the forest burst into vibrant greens and wildflowers, bringing renewed energy to the residents, who felt the pulse of life all around them. However, the weather continued to surprise them. Sometimes, a sunny day with clear skies could transform into a hailstorm in just minutes, catching everyone off guard. The townsfolk had learned to read the signs, the air suddenly becoming heavy, birds flying low, and the sudden silence that hung in the air just before a storm. Children grew up learning to read the weather, observing the movements of nature, and respecting the region's unpredictable climate. Yet nothing could prepare them for the sudden and violent storm that hit the town on an afternoon that promised to be peaceful. The day had begun with an almost unusual lightness, the sun shining brightly and warming the streets and fields around. But as the afternoon wore on, dark clouds began to form on the horizon, thick and threatening, like a curtain of smoke slowly spreading across the sky. The first to notice the change were the elders, who had seen the weather shift abruptly before, but never with such a sinister force. As the sky closed in, the birds suddenly fell silent, and the trees began to sway almost restlessly. The wind, which had previously whispered among the leaves, now howled with increasing intensity, as if it had transformed into an invisible beast, bringing with it a harbinger of something unknown. In the distance, thunder rumbled, each clap echoing through the hills and the forest, filling the air with a tension that spread like electricity. Alarmed, the residents of Willow Creek abandoned their tasks and hurried to protect their homes. In the streets, entire families worked side by side, trying to reinforce doors and windows with boards, ropes, and anything they could find. Mothers called for their children, the older ones helped the younger ones, and everyone exchanged worried glances, as if sensing that this storm was unlike the others. The wind, now more violent, tore leaves and branches from the trees, sending them flying uncontrollably through the narrow streets. The first heavy drop of rain fell, followed by many others, each one like a small burst that seemed to explode upon hitting the ground. Within minutes, a curtain of water poured over the town, obscuring visibility and turning the ground into a muddy river. Puddles formed quickly, and the sound of the rain, mixed with the roar of the wind, filled every corner of the town, creating a chaotic and terrifying symphony. The forest surrounding Willow Creek seemed to come alive with the storm's force, as if the trees were trying to resist the wind that threatened to uproot them. Rivers that had once flowed calmly now overflowed, and the rush of water threatened to inundate the small wooden bridges connecting the more remote parts of town. The residents watched in fear and respect, knowing that there was little they could do except wait and protect one another. Inside the houses, people gathered around candles and lanterns, whispering words of hope and comforting each other. Each thunderclap that shattered the silence was met with anxious glances, as if they were waiting for relief that seemed far away. With each passing minute, the storm appeared to intensify, testing the strength of everyone caught in Willow Creek that fateful afternoon. Among the residents trying to shield themselves from the fury of the storm was a witty 9-year-old boy with bright, curious eyes named Oliver. Known by everyone in Willow Creek, Oliver was the kind of kid who always had a smile on his face and a keen eye for everything around him. It was common to see him running through the hills with a group of friends or alone, collecting curious stones and rare tree leaves, as if every little piece of nature was a hidden treasure. He had a heart as adventurous as it was kind, and his caring nature made him a beloved figure to all, even the more reserved folks. That afternoon, however, Oliver sensed something different in the air. The wind howled like never before, and the clouds closed in so quickly that he could barely keep up with the changing scenery. Seeing his parents signaling for him to come back, he obeyed without hesitation. With quick steps, he began to run toward the house, dodging the first drops of heavy rain that fell in large, icy droplets like stones. But as he was just a few feet from the front door, something caught his eye. Glancing to the side, Oliver saw Mr. Jenkins, his elderly neighbor, trembling as he tried to maneuver his cane and shield himself from the wind. Mr. Jenkins was a man who had seen many winters pass in Willow Creek. Although he was somewhat reserved, he had a friendly demeanor, and whenever he met Oliver, he would break into a shy smile and share stories about how the town had changed over the years. That elderly man, with his hunched posture and worn-out clothes, was clearly in distress. The wind seemed to push him back every time he tried to take a step forward, and his hat, which he always wore with pride, was ripped off his head and blown away by the gusts. Seeing this, Oliver's heart raced. He knew Mr. Jenkins needed help, and with the storm worsening by the second, every moment counted. Without a second thought, Oliver veered off his path and ran to his neighbor, shouting his name to be heard above the noise of the rain and wind. "Mr. Jenkins, do you need help?" The boy's voice was firm, even though his hands were freezing and his heart pounded. Mr. Jenkins looked at him with a mix of surprise and gratitude. Trying to speak despite the wind stealing his breath, he murmured, "Boy, you should be inside, with your parents." But Oliver, determined, had already taken hold of his arm and wrapped him in a firm hug, trying to protect him from the gusts that nearly knocked them over. He knew he couldn't leave him there, alone and vulnerable. "Don't worry about me, Mr. Jenkins," Oliver said, with a courage that seemed far beyond his 9 years. "Let's get inside together. I've got you." He looked around, trying to gauge the distance to the neighbor's door, and how they could reach the shelter without getting caught by the next strong gust of wind. Step by step, the two moved forward, leaning on each other for support. Each step was a battle against the wind, which whistled furiously around them, and the rain, which was now falling as if the sky was collapsing. The mud began to slip under Oliver's feet, but he held his ground, gripping Mr. Jenkins with all the strength he had. Slowly, they approached the neighbor's door, while the storm seemed to grow stronger, as if testing them at every moment. When they finally reached the door, Oliver reached out to open it, but his fingers were so cold that he could barely turn the knob. Mr. Jenkins, noticing the boy's struggle, placed his wrinkled hand over Oliver's, helping him to open the door. As soon as they entered, the noise of the storm was muffled by the walls of the house, and the two stood there, taking deep breaths as they tried to regain their composure. Mr. Jenkins, with tears of emotion and gratitude shining in his eyes, looked at Oliver and said, his voice choked, "Thank you, my boy. I don't know what I would have done without you." Oliver just smiled, still a bit out of breath, and replied with the typical simplicity of children, "We're neighbors, Mr. Jenkins. That's what neighbors do, right?" In that moment, Mr. Jenkins realized that this small act of bravery and kindness meant far more than any words could express. The storm raged outside, fierce and relentless, but inside that house, a special bond had formed between the old man and the boy, a connection that the fury of nature could never destroy. Mr. Jenkins lived in a small, old house at the end of the street, where ivy-covered walls and a worn wooden fence held the remnants of his past life. Since his wife had passed away, he spent his days in silence, watching time pass by the window and exchanging few words with neighbors. Winter had left its marks on his body, making every movement more challenging, and his figure looked even more fragile against the storm's wrath. As he struggled to maintain his balance against the cutting wind, his steps wobbled on the soaked ground. The old, cracked boots slipped in the mud, and the cane, which used to be his constant support, almost seemed to give way under the force of the storm. He tried to lift himself with one last effort, but a sharp pain shot through his leg, causing him to stumble once more. The world around him seemed to spin, and for a moment, he thought the cold ground would welcome him without hesitation. But just before he could fall, a familiar voice reached him, cutting through the deafening noise of the storm. "Mr. Jenkins, hold on, I'm coming to help you." It was Oliver. The boy, with a determined expression and his eyes squinting against the rain that pelted his face, was running toward him, arms outstretched to offer support. With a determination that belied his small stature, Oliver positioned himself next to the neighbor, grabbing him by the arm and clutching the sleeve of Mr. Jenkins's coat, as if anchoring him there. He lifted his face to the man, offering an encouraging smile, and Mr. Jenkins, surprised by the boy's bravery, allowed himself to be led. The journey to Mr. Jenkins's house felt endless. Each step was a struggle, as the wind relentlessly pushed them back, and the rain fell so heavily that they could barely see the path ahead. The cold was biting, seeping into their clothes and making them shiver. Oliver felt his hands growing numb, but he didn't let go of Mr. Jenkins's arm for anything. It was as if, at that moment, he had decided that no obstacle would prevent them from reaching the safe haven of the house. With every careful step, the old man and the boy formed an unlikely but powerful partnership. In an effort to lighten the burden, Oliver began chatting about trivial things, trying to distract his neighbor from the harshness of their trek. He talked about the last time he saw a rainbow in the sky, and how just the week before, he had found a stone that shimmered in the sun, looking like a rare gem. Mr. Jenkins listened, focusing on the boy's soothing words, feeling his weight eased by Oliver's presence, which carried a quiet hope. Finally, when the little wooden house came into view, Oliver let out a sigh of relief, almost inaudible, but enough for Mr. Jenkins to notice the boy's determination and relief. Carefully, he helped his neighbor up the small step at the entrance, and together they pushed open the heavy door, stepping into the house that, though humble, was now a sanctuary from the storm. As they crossed the threshold, the silence felt welcoming. The wooden walls of the house muffled the sounds of the tempest outside, and the air, although chilly, was dry and secure. Oliver helped Mr. Jenkins sit in an old, worn armchair that still emanated a faint lavender scent, the favorite perfume of Mr. Jenkins's late wife, whose traces still filled the air from time to time. Mr. Jenkins, with a low voice and a gaze full of gratitude, looked at Oliver and murmured, "You're an extraordinary boy, you know?" Oliver just gave a shy smile, as if what he had done was something natural, not an act of courage amidst the fury of a storm. Kneeling beside the armchair, he watched Mr. Jenkins with attentive eyes, waiting for him to catch his breath while the storm continued to roar outside, testing the limits of the little town of Willow Creek. After settling Mr. Jenkins in the cozy old armchair, Oliver lingered for a moment at his side, keeping a watchful eye on him. He wanted to make sure the neighbor was okay, that his breathing was calming, and that the warmth of the shelter was beginning to chase away the chill that the storm had imposed on both of them. The rain drummed on the roof, and the thunder was now just a distant murmur, muted by the thick wooden walls of the small house. Before he could ask if Mr. Jenkins needed anything, Oliver heard the door open behind him. His parents rushed in, their faces pale and eyes wide. Upon seeing him there, drenched, clothes clinging to his body and hair dripping, a mix of relief and worry washed over their faces. His mother knelt beside him, enveloping him in a tight hug, and with a trembling voice, asked if he was all right. "I'm fine, Mom. I'm good," Oliver replied, giving a tired but serene smile. He felt his father's strong, comforting presence beside him, wrapping him in a dry coat, as if wanting to shield his son from any remnants of the storm raging outside. His parents, relieved to have him there, still looked at him with that expression of having 1,000 questions to ask, while also wanting to simply thank him for being safe. Mr. Jenkins watched the scene in silence, and he broke into a grateful smile. In a gentle voice, he said to Oliver's parents, "This boy is a true hero." He didn't need to say more, as his words carried all the admiration and gratitude he felt for the kid who had risked facing the storm to help him. Oliver blushed slightly, looking away, still uncomfortable being called a hero. His parents nodded, their eyes shining with pride. Finally, after some parting words and confirming that Mr. Jenkins was safe and had everything he needed, Oliver's parents guided him back home. The walk was short but intense, with the wind still cutting through the air, and the rain continuing to pour heavily. His father kept him close, and his mother held his hand tightly, as if only now, at this moment of returning home, could she relax a bit from the worry that had plagued her since the storm began. As they reached the front door, Oliver felt a familiar relief upon seeing the lights on and the delicious aroma of hot soup wafting through the slightly open door. His parents quickly ushered him inside, and without wasting a moment, his mother brought soft towels to dry him off. Water dripped from his clothes, pooling on the wooden floor, but Oliver barely noticed. He was home, safe, and his heart was still racing, both from the adrenaline of the adventure and the satisfaction of having helped Mr. Jenkins. After changing into dry clothes and putting on a warm sweater, Oliver was led to the kitchen table, where a steaming bowl of soup awaited him. As the steam rose, filling the room with the scent of fresh vegetables and herbs, he held the spoon but paused for a moment, staring at the soup as if he was still processing everything that had happened. His parents sat beside him, and his dad placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. "You were really brave today, son," his dad said, his deep voice softened with pride. Oliver looked at him, and a shy smile broke out on the boy's face. He knew he had followed his heart, but hearing those words from his parents made him feel something special. It was as if at that moment, he had grown just a little bit more. After a few moments of silence, as he savored the hot soup and felt the invigorating warmth spread through his body, Oliver found himself gazing out the window. The storm still roared outside, the winds whipping the trees, and the shadows of the clouds raced across the sky. But now he saw it all through different eyes. There was something grand about facing the unknown, something he would never forget. And as the last rumble of thunder faded into the distance, Oliver knew that the image of Mr. Jenkins smiling in gratitude would forever be etched in his memory, a reminder of the courage he discovered within himself that unforgettable afternoon in Willow Creek. Sitting at the table warmed by the comforting soup, Oliver looked at the bowl before him, but his thoughts drifted back to Mr. Jenkins, alone in his house, facing the aftermath of the storm. The warmth and comfort surrounding him made him remember that the neighbor might still be cold, and worse, without a hot meal to warm him. He frowned worried, and raised his eyes to his parents who were sitting beside him, with a determined expression and the same sparkle of enthusiasm he always had when helping others. Oliver said, "Mom, Dad, can we take some soup to Mr. Jenkins? I'm sure he's hungry, and this soup is too good to keep to ourselves." Oliver's mom exchanged a glance with his dad, both a bit hesitant. They had just brought him inside after his daring escapade through the storm, and instinctively they wanted to keep him safe and warm. But Oliver, with that unmistakable gleam of kindness and insistence in his eyes, continued, speaking softly and persuasively, "He was alone, and I know the storm must have been tough on him. I just want him to feel good too." Touched by his son's selflessness, Oliver's dad sighed and nodded. "Okay, Oliver, but we'll go with you. I don't want you going alone." With the plan set, Oliver's mom hurried to grab another bowl, filling it with the hot, nourishing soup, and putting a lid on it to keep the heat in. She wrapped the bowl in a cloth to avoid burning her hands, and handed the package to her son, who carefully held the offering like it was a treasure. Dressed in sturdy coats and boots, the three of them stepped out, braving the damp, chilly night that still bore the remnants of the storm that had swept through the town just hours earlier. The rain had stopped, but puddles reflected the lamplight on the streets of Willow Creek, creating tiny glimmers that made the town look like a fairy tale under the moonlight. The wind had calmed, leaving the air cold and biting, but Oliver was resolute, and his parents walked beside him, sharing in his generous spirit. As they walked down the street toward Mr. Jenkins' house, The silence was punctuated by the sound of their footsteps on the wet leaves, and the rustling of the trees around them. When they reached the front door, Oliver knocked softly, hesitating for a moment. Mr. Jenkins likely didn't expect visitors, especially at this hour. After a few seconds, they heard the sound of heavy footsteps approaching, and the door swung open to reveal the old neighbor, looking surprised and a bit drowsy. "Oliver? And your parents? What brings you here at this hour?" Mr. Jenkins asked, blinking in the dim light of the hallway lamp. Oliver smiled, extending the bowl of soup toward him, and said simply, "We brought you some soup. My mom made it nice and hot. We thought a warm meal would be nice after all that effort in the storm." Mr. Jenkins paused for a moment, touched by the gesture. He looked at the bowl wrapped in the cloth with shining eyes, as if he was receiving a rare gift. With trembling hands, he took the bundle and felt the warmth through the fabric. "Oh, Oliver, you all are truly special. I didn't expect this, but I'm very grateful." As Oliver's parents observed the scene, a profound sense of pride washed over them. They knew their son was special, but witnessing that moment, Mr. Jenkins holding the bowl and looking at Oliver with genuine gratitude, made their hearts swell with an emotion words couldn't capture. When Mr. Jenkins invited them inside, Oliver glanced at his parents, who nodded kindly. They stepped into the house, where the air was still chilly, but their warm presence began to chase away the loneliness and silence of the place. Oliver helped Mr. Jenkins settle back into his armchair, and his mother unwrapped the bowl, revealing the soup that still wafted that delicious aroma of herbs and veggies. The old man took his first spoonful, feeling the warmth of the soup spread through his body and warm his very soul. He sighed, closing his eyes for a moment, as if that flavor transported him to another time, a time when he shared hearty meals with his wife. When he opened his eyes again, a gentle smile formed on his lips. Between light conversations, soft laughter, and stories about Mr. Jenkins' youthful days, the little visit became a moment of reconnection, not just between neighbors, but between souls finding comfort and friendship in a simple act of kindness. Oliver, hanging on every word from Mr. Jenkins, listened with fascination, absorbing each story, each detail, as if they were tales from a distant past. When they finally said their goodbyes, Oliver felt that something special had occurred. As they crossed the threshold back into the cold night, he looked back and saw Mr. Jenkins waving to them from the window, a fragile, smiling shadow illuminated by the dim glow of the hallway lantern. Oliver knew that night would forever be etched in his memory, and as he walked home with his parents, his heart warmed and his face beaming, he felt he had truly experienced the real value of kindness and love for one another. Mr. Jenkins had always kept a secret that no one in Willow Creek could imagine. In his modest home, behind weathered doors and foggy windows, he held something that to everyone else never existed. It was an inheritance, valuable, not just for its material worth, but also for the significance it held for him, a relic from ancient times, filled with memories and a history that few could understand. For years, he had pondered how the fate of this inheritance would unfold, especially with the loneliness increasingly settling in after losing his beloved wife. There were no children, no close relatives, no intimate friends to share his legacy. Each time that thought emerged, uncertainty and emptiness filled his mind. Who could he leave something so precious to? After that night, as he watched the silhouette of Oliver and his family disappear down the street, a different feeling took hold of Mr. Jenkins' heart. He sat in his old worn leather armchair, gazing at the silent room that still held the echoes of laughter and stories shared just moments before. The aroma of the hot soup still lingered in the air, and each memory of that night seemed to awaken something dormant within him. Little Oliver, that kid of only 9 years, with bright eyes and a smile capable of warming even the coldest heart, had done the impossible. He had filled the void in Mr. Jenkins' life. Oliver's kindness, his selfless act of braving the storm to help him, felt like a breath of hope in a heart that had grown used to beating alone. Mr. Jenkins recalled the firm, reassuring touch of Oliver's little shoulder as he helped him walk to the door. How could someone so young have such a generous soul? It was as if he stood before a rare being, someone who instinctively knew the importance of compassion and friendship. With that thought, He slowly rose and walked to a corner of the room where, hidden behind a shelf full of books and mementos, there was a discreet safe. That's where he kept his inheritance, a treasure that for years no one even suspected he possessed. He carefully turned the combination, listening for the click that revealed the secret he had guarded for so long. When the door swung open, the glow of what lay inside illuminated his tired eyes. Inside the safe was an antique wooden box, hand-carved, something that had belonged to his family for generations. Upon opening it, he revealed a collection of rare gold coins, delicate jewelry, and a pocket watch that had belonged to his great-grandfather, a unique piece that had accompanied the men in his family through the ages. Additionally, there were letters, maps, and documents telling the story of a lineage of sacrifices and triumphs. That treasure was more than just wealth. It was an inheritance of stories, of love, of life. Mr. Jenkins ran his trembling fingers over the pieces, feeling the weight and worth of each one. With each touch, memories flooded back. Recollections of his father sharing tales about the pocket watch. Nights when his wife admired the jewelry with an enchanted smile. The sound of coins clinking like music. He had protected it with care, waiting for the right moment to find someone who truly deserved to receive such a legacy. And now that moment had finally arrived. In his mind, there was no doubt. Oliver, with his generous heart and innate kindness, was the right person. He wanted the boy not only to inherit that material value, but to carry with him the story it told, to understand the importance of sacrifice and the love that legacy represented. In the simple act of sharing a warm soup, Oliver had shown Mr. Jenkins that there were still people in the world who believed in doing good without expecting anything in return. In the silence of his home, Jenkins closed the box, feeling a deep calm he hadn't experienced in years. He knew he wouldn't hand over the treasure immediately. Oliver was still too young to grasp the full weight of that inheritance. But Mr. Jenkins had a plan. He would leave clear instructions, along with a letter detailing the story of each piece, the significance of each item, and what he hoped Oliver would do with that legacy. He knew that, one day, when the boy was older and had a better understanding of life's value, he would fully appreciate the gift he had received. With the decision made, Mr. Jenkins began writing the letter that very night, crafting each word with careful handwriting and sincere emotion. He recounted memories from his life, stories from his youth, and the lessons he had learned over the years. He expressed his wish for Oliver to use that inheritance to do good, to maintain that generous heart, and to bring hope wherever he went. The next morning, when he crossed paths with Oliver on the street, Mr. Jenkins smiled at him differently, as if they already shared a special secret. And Oliver, with that innocent and captivating sparkle in his eyes, smiled back, completely unaware of what the future held for him. In the letter Mr. Jenkins was writing to Oliver, he carefully revealed parts of his life, and the history he carried, in a way that the boy could gradually understand over the years. Jenkins began with an affectionate tone, like a grandfather speaking directly to his grandson's heart, narrating the lessons he learned throughout his journey, and what he wished Oliver would someday grasp when he was older. He wrote about his family's sacrifices and how, generation after generation, that treasure had been kept not out of vanity or ostentation, but as a symbol of something much greater. This treasure, Oliver, he wrote, is not just gold or jewels. It represents the kindness and honesty of all who came before me. And now, I see those same qualities in you, my young friend. Mr. Jenkins revealed that he had always dreamed of finding someone who carried that same spark of generosity, and now, with Oliver, he finally felt that this person existed. He didn't want the boy to receive the treasure as just a simple inheritance. He wanted Oliver to understand over the years the importance of using what he had received to do good, to help others, and above all, to continue nurturing the kind heart he already possessed. In the letter, Jenkins detailed a careful plan. He wished for the inheritance to be given to Oliver only when the boy reached 18. For Jenkins, that age would mark the time when Oliver would have the maturity to fully understand the meaning of that legacy. And to ensure that the sentimental value and the stories behind the items were preserved, he suggested that a trusted lawyer keep the letter and the treasure until the right moment. Mr. Jenkins, always attentive to detail, also added a special touch to his letter. He prepared a kind of heart map, a set of tasks and life missions that Oliver should accomplish over the years before receiving the treasure. Each mission was a life lesson. Offer help to a stranger, as you did for me that night. Make a friend in an unexpected place. And find something that brings you joy, and share it with someone in need. These missions, he hoped, would guide Oliver along the path of kindness and generosity, so that when he received the treasure, he would see it not as a material gift, but as a continuation of something that had already been a part of his life. I want you to understand, Oliver, he wrote, that the true value of this gift isn't in what it can buy, but in what it can inspire you to do. Finally, Jenkins left one last secret to be revealed only when Oliver completed the final task of the heart map. He mentioned in few words that within the inheritance lay a special item, something no one in town imagined existed. It was a unique and rare piece, imbued with a profound story and personal significance that he hoped to share with Oliver at the right moment. The letter ended with a heartfelt message. When the day comes that you read this, I want you to know that wherever I am, I will be proud of you. My greatest gift isn't the treasure itself, but the joy of knowing it will be used by someone like you. The letter was carefully folded and sealed, along with the treasure, and entrusted to the lawyer. Mr. Jenkins gave precise instructions on how and when to deliver the legacy to Oliver, leaving everything in the hands of time. And so, that secret remained guarded, like a seed waiting for the right moment to bloom. With each passing year, Mr. Jenkins watched Oliver grow, observing from a distance with a satisfied smile, knowing that the future held something special for that boy, who had once offered him a simple gesture of kindness amid the storm. The next day, as the small town of Willow Creek was still recovering from the damage left by the storm, one thing was certain. The letter Mr. Jenkins had left for Oliver remained sealed, holding a secret that couldn't yet be revealed. That morning, the town woke under the shadow of the storm, but also illuminated by a new glimmer of hope. Branches were scattered across the streets, fences had fallen, and some broken windows stood as silent witnesses to the fury of the previous night. However, amidst the chaos, a wave of admiration and gratitude swept through the residents, as the tale of a brave 9-year-old boy, who defied the wind and rain to save his neighbor, began to spread. Oliver's courage, a spark of heroism in the face of disaster, echoed in the conversations of the townsfolk. This little town, which often faced the whims of the weather, had never seen anything so inspiring emerge from such a stormy night. On the corners and sidewalks where residents gathered to assess the damage, the boy's story transformed into legend, each retelling infused with emotion and admiration. Soon, everyone knew of the boy's bravery, and he was affectionately nicknamed the Little Guardian of Willow Creek. Even the elders, accustomed to a life of challenges and resilience, felt tears well up in their eyes as they heard about the boy's selfless act. The town, which often seemed forgotten by the outside world, now had a reason to feel proud, the generous and fearless heart of one of its young residents. As Oliver walked through the streets with his parents, he felt the weight of the admiring gazes and warm smiles directed his way. The blacksmith, a strong man with a deep voice, waved at him and exclaimed, "You've got the courage of a lion, kid. Not everyone would brave a storm like that to help Mr. Jenkins." Oliver, feeling shy, looked away, but the humility in his heart was overshadowed by the pride swelling in his chest. To him, he had just done what was right, and the joy he felt from helping someone else had never compared to anything else. In the town square, where the community gathered to lend a hand and repair the damages, the mayor was waiting for Oliver and his parents. With a serious but warm demeanor, he commanded everyone's attention. "Today, we honor a true example of courage and generosity. Oliver, your act reminded us of the importance of taking care of one another, even in the toughest times." His voice echoed, and he paused to take in the emotional faces surrounding him. It's this spirit that keeps Willow Creek united. And today, Oliver showed us that the heart of our town is safe in the hands of the next generation. The mayor's words were met with applause and encouraging cheers. Some residents expressed their gratitude with warm hugs, while others brought small tokens, like a shiny apple from the local farmer, a handmade ribbon from the seamstress, and even a silver coin from the blacksmith as a symbol of respect. For Oliver, each gesture represented more than just a simple gift. It was a heartfelt reminder of the connection and gratitude forming between him and the community. As they made their way home, his mother gently tousled his hair and softly said, "I always knew you were special, Oliver, but today you showed it to everyone." The boy smiled, still taking in the magnitude of everything that had happened since the night before. There was something different in the air, a hidden connection that seemed to bond every inhabitant of the town. Later, when he finally found himself alone, Oliver thought about Mr. Jenkins, and how his simple act of kindness had not only touched the old neighbor, but had also inspired the entire town. That night, he fell asleep with a light heart, unaware that his bravery was just the beginning of a much larger journey. As Mr. Jenkins's legacy patiently awaited revelation, a new hope blossomed in Willow Creek, promising that the bond between the two would always run deeper than anyone could imagine. And so, the act of salvation and the hidden letter continued to weave a story that, though still unrevealed, promised to illuminate Oliver's future in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The story of Oliver and his bravery isn't just a tale of heroism. It's a powerful reminder of the impact a single act of kindness can have on a community. Amidst challenges and storms, both literal and metaphorical, the actions of a child can inspire hope and unity, demonstrating that the human spirit can shine even in the darkest hours. Through Oliver's journey, we learn that each of us has the ability to make a difference, to be a beacon of light for others. The selfless act of saving Mr. Jenkins not only strengthened their bond, but also brought forth the essence of solidarity that defines Willow Creek. It's this connection that transforms an ordinary town into a vibrant home, where each story is a thread weaving a rich tapestry of experiences, memories, and lessons. And now, the big question remains: how will the letter containing Mr. Jenkins's secret legacy be delivered to Oliver? What will this revelation mean for the boy's future and for the town? Feel free to share your thoughts, and let us know if you'd like to find out what happens next in this exciting journey.